you collectors. I hope you're well. It's time to talk about spooky things. It is episode 53 today. Fictional Monsters. I just figured since it's going to be fall soon, we should have this conversation because I never talked about them before. I rather like monsters, and not from a Hotel Transylvania perspective, although that is kind of the cute way to look at it. But having grown up with horror and liking horror, I just thought 'tis the season. And monsters often kind of get grouped into little categories, and they're just put aside for scary purposes. And that's certainly great, but does anybody ever look at where they came from or the backstory or how we got nervous about them in the first place? So in no order or importance, just sort of what came off the top of my head first, I'd like to address zombies because I'm obsessed with The Walking Dead and very sad that it's even going to come to an end. But zombies, really, for us and American culture, made famous by George Romero, which Greg Nicotero, who works for Walking Dead, was his apprentice and learned all those practical effects. And Night of the Living Dead was a 1968 film where they first really debuted as a scary thing. So it's really much older than that, though. Ancient Greeks were credited to be the first people to fear zombies. When people died, they would put heavy rocks on the graves, and the fear was that they would come back to life and they would come get them. So they put heavy rocks in them to keep them down, and therefore the body couldn't move out of the grave. And you just wonder like where that idea came from, because the idea of a zombie, they don't talk and they're just sort of reanimated, but sometimes they're slow and they eat brains or whatever. You see derivations of this like in World War Z, where they learn to run and then they also bypass people that are sick. That was kind of an interesting take on it. But generically speaking, you have zombies or corpses that have been brought back to life by whatever reason, or could be an infection or could be something, and they just go after people, but all they really know is to go bite them or scratch them, and then that's bad and you're infected, and then that person gets sick. So it's pretty popular, and obviously now I think Walking Dead really reinfused and reinvigorated that. But that's always been a fear, that you have this dead carcass like walking after you, coming after you, and that's kind of what makes graveyards scary. Witches. So witches became a thing on the mid 14th century, especially actually in Germany, which had the biggest execution rate for witches. Ireland had the lowest execution rate, fun facts, but it kind of went all around at that point. And it was there was a new book in Germany, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation, but it was The Hammer of Witches. It ended back then, went viral for its time. The Malleus Maleficarum. I believe it was actually in Latin that it was written in. My poor pronunciation here, I apologize, but that was The Hammer of Witches, and it went quote-unquote viral, and it really spread the mass hysteria of witches, which at that time, if you were redheaded, you were conceived as, you were thought to be a witch. If you were left-handed, you could have been a witch. If you were both, look out. And obviously there, were women that they were looking at, that if you did what they used to call an innocent, if you were into like homeopathy, or you were considered spiritual, not necessarily religious, and that was scary to them. If you followed a lot of the ideas of early like paganism, in the sense of like worshiping nature and the Lady on the Lake, or the birds and things like that, like people would fear, and it was just a mass hysteria that fed from the fear that made people start to suspect people as witches. And the funny thing is, the other side of that is warlocks. So there could be men, if you will, witches. They weren't as often gone after, attacked, or suspected, but they also existed too. And the people that got together in what they would call covens oftentimes were people trying to protect themselves because they were simply innocents, or following like homeopathy or remedies in nature, which is funny because we look for that now, and is it organic? Is it like this kind of vitamin or that? So it's ironic how that's gone full circle. But back then that could get you killed, or at least questioned, and a lot of times watched, and it's where they get the expression going on a witch hunt, even if they didn't necessarily have any kind of evidence. Maybe you were making soup. Oh, you have a cauldron, you're a witch. Oh, what are you putting in that? Or if it was an herb or something that they hadn't heard of. It was so early on, and science was at such a low point that they would start to suspect people and call them witches, and they would often kill them. and you'd have witch trials. Vampires. Love me some vampires. So the most vampires, the idea really stemmed from Bram Stoker in 1897, Dracula. Nosferatu, which is funny because there's a current series out that Stephen King's son Joe Hill wrote. So keeping it in the family, but that became a TV show. But the idea of hominis nocturna, the idea that somebody was like a nighttime stalker or a nighttime person that would drink blood. Really, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, was the person that was a real person, and they just said that, as it came through, he was Vlad the Impaler, and there was a lot of blood involved, obviously, and he would often decapitate his when he would have a lot of victories over people, and I would say all his victims got put on spikes outside of the wars that he was in, and he got known as Vlad the Impaler, so blood was flowing, and that's where that came from. I can't say that we've ever traced him to actually bite someone. Mercy Brown was also another person that I truly never heard of that was credited as being an early vampire. But if you look at it, I mean, it's got its own romanticism behind it. Whether you're looking at something like Blade, which was kind of a new take on it, where you have like a daywalker, or you're looking at it like old school Bram Stoker, where you had crosses and silver and things like that would hurt a vampire. Certainly sunlight. And then you could even look at it like Twilight. Ooh, we have sparkly vampires and they're vegetarians, So it's kind of neat to look at the mythology behind it. But it did all kind of start with the idea of Vlad the Impaler, the real person, not necessarily drinking blood, but again, blood flowing from lots of carnage there. And, it's gone all the way through many iterations, and Bela Lugosi and Frank Langella, and then going even like on a silly twist. We've had things like Love at First Bite and Once Bitten. So as far as historically with books and movies, they're popular. People like vampires. I mean, I joked about Hotel Transylvania, but it is true. There's a lot of love for vampires. True Blood was a huge success. Vampire Diary is a huge success. These are books and shows, and they've gone on from teens all the way through adults. So it's just there's something attractive about it, and the idea that you have this like stalker person that could also possibly change forms, or and yet there's a seductiveness about it, and at the same token we want to hear more stories like it. So whether it's true or not, it came from a little teeny bit of truth. That's fiction got spun over time, and everybody's all about vampires. Along the line with those are werewolves. So the origin of the werewolf tale is kind of hard to pinpoint, but a lot of people say that it came from the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it also appeared in Greek myths. The legend of the Lycaon, and in the Nordic lore, the saga of Volsungs. Now, Lupe, Lupo, Lupine, when you hear anything like that, it's wolf related. So I always laugh because I was never a big Harry Potter fan, but I remember when Professor Lupin comes along, the minute they said his name, I didn't even know beans about Harry Potter, never read the books, but I thought, okay, this guy's a werewolf. Like, I just knew that from Latin. Hello, read a book. So if you see that, no different than feline, cat, canine, dog, when you look into the etymologies of words, lichens, you have like the underworld and the lichens, like that was always the werewolf side. Now again, you go Twilight, where all of a sudden they become friends when they weren't. They were opposing sides. Werewolves generally hate vampires and vice versa. And the funny thing is, the silver bullet was supposed to kill a werewolf, and then in some ideologies of vampires, the silver can hurt the vampire as well. So you never really know there, but it's a silver was reserved to kill a werewolf in the heart of the werewolf. So they are generally like lions and hyenas, but again, Twilight sort of brought them together. But generally, a person was either bitten and they would turn into a werewolf, and that's where you got the bit of the full moon, and people acted strangely during full moons, and that was always associated with like tides and different things that were really happening on Earth. So they took that little bit of truth again and spun it into something that wasn't necessarily real but believable, and that's all you need is a few people to listen to a good storyteller, and then you got yourself a great story. And if you ever saw Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, they speak about that a lot, because he's actually going after these different monsters and going after specifically vampires. And it turns out that, spoiler alert, he is a werewolf that was meant to take down Dracula. So Who knew? Um, Mummies. What to do with mummies? So mummies are interesting. Mummification, definitely a real thing. Certainly ancient Egyptians practiced that, and they would basically wrap up and bury dead people after removing all of their organs and put them in jars nearby in case they needed them for later. I get the save it for later concept, and I understand that they would have these sarcophagi built into these pyramids, and a lot of them, we'll talk in another episode about curses and how they were disturbed, and that could unleash lots of horribleness. But the mummy itself could, come after you theoretically. Of course, it's body wrapped up, and of course, the Brendan Fraser movies were really popular to that. So much so that Universal in Florida still has the ride, which people love, and it's just that they could get more strength, or because they were already technically dead, they could build up immunity to things like bullets, or, okay, yes, you could cut them, I guess, apart or cut a limb, but they could still keep coming after you. So it was difficult to kind of kill something that was already dead, was the theory behind it. But a mummy would only come after you generally if you disturbed it. So it wasn't just like mummies running around everywhere, but more so in Egyptian practice that you would see that. Again, real story, real truth. Pyramids really happened. They did mummify people, and then they kind of spun it into a fictional thing. And that leads us to another fictional thing, Frankenstein. So Mary Shelley wrote the book Frankenstein in 1818. A lot of people don't know she was a woman that did it. A lot of people think a man wrote it. No. And Frankenstein, it's been, again, funny and serious and redone 50 million ways on print, in books and theater and in movies and short stories. So the idea that you could kind of put a body together from different cadavers and then have it be electrocuted to life by some smart guy, in this case, Dr. Frankenstein, and get everybody together to, it's alive, and make this thing walk and have a conscience and be better than the creator, was sort of the point. Was that sometimes what you make can actually be better than the person who made it, which was generally the situation. He was also a very feared man. So there's a lot of it about insecurities and pieces put together, and how like that collective makes one big thing that ended up being better and more genuine, even though it wasn't real per se from the beginning. Kind of self-awareness there. So that was interesting that was put together that way. Again, you don't really see Frankenstein, you think of fire and people going after him, but he was just sort of a big cloddy dude that, obviously could hurt you just by size and force, but wasn't looking necessarily to hurt you. So kind of a gentle giant. Ghosts. So ghosts in general, it could be lots of things. Ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call it, ghouls, goblins, etc. I'm sure there's all subdivisions of this, but ghosts, when you think of like an apparition or something, yeah, you got the funny, like the Ghostbuster side of things. And then you've got, hey, this spirit won't leave whatever place, like poltergeist. Generally, it's a person's spirit. And originally, it's from as early as the 1st century that we start hearing about ghost stories. You hear them on ships. You hear them with the mariners that would come in and say different things. And you hear it about a person's soul that got trapped in a place or got associated with an item or an object. And it could be good, bad, or ugly. It could have been somebody didn't know they were dead, or like Gettysburg Battlefield. We hear about that all the time, where people's lives were taken suddenly and they're kind of trapped wandering around. I loved M. Night Shyamalan's Sixth Sense, because you had that, I see dead people. It's kind of a joke, but yeah, the kid had the ability to see that, and they don't know they're dead. So they're kind of stuck and not able to move on. Some weren't malicious. Some were just looking for help. People argue that they may have noises or spirits in their home or in a place or with a thing associated with an article or an object. And then there's sometimes malicious entities or spirits, and you don't know they're trapped or they can't get out, or maybe they were violently taken from this earth and you don't know what their backstory is. And sometimes they're looking to hurt other people. I've worked in haunted places, and I was lucky we had nice ghosts there, so they were sort of helpful. I mean, sometimes you would jump a bit, but they were never after. I never felt icky or yucky. Sometimes it did get very cold, but I never felt any kind of malignant thing. But again, that's just my experience. But a lot of different people have had the sense of being watched, or like a sense of doom, darkness, like orbs they can't account for. And who knows? I mean, who's to say what one person sees? You could have the same 5 people look at the same event and have 5 different stories. So you never know. But ghosts, goblins, ghouls, etc., those kind of things always floating around. The Invisible Man. So this is kind of neat because, again, we're starting from fiction straight up, and you have this idea that there's a person and then he can make himself invisible. So not necessarily an altered entity, but just a regular person that now has this almost superpower. And as a result of it, makes that person have the choice of, what's that line from Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility. They decide to either be good and use that for good, or be evil and do bad things and be concealed and not share that with people. So that's a fine line that person has to walk with their conscience. And it really comes down to, what are you going to choose? Obviously, he could sneak around and do bad things, and that's sort of what goes on eventually because it's almost too tempting. So that's kind of like a man versus himself situation in terms of conflict, but I don't know that I call him in a goblin ghoul situation, but I guess technically he's a monster. He gets honorable mention. Godzilla, the Fly, the Blob, the Leprechaun, Krampus, all these different things. To me, they're one big blob. They're like a classic monster where it's actually a thing, or it's a normal thing that got magnified or morphed. So like, with the Fly, it turned into like a huge fly. Some of the old creature feature back in the day before they had the technology, and way before they had any kind of CGI stuff going on. They were making plastic things, and they were making, different suits and stuff. So, whether it's a big lizard out of the sea and Godzilla came to get you, or the Blob, like literally was a blob where they ran out of ideas. They just made a big morphy thing that kept consuming stuff in its way. And you could argue that it's consumerism or, some sort of metaphor for people and overspending or not paying attention to core values. And that may be, that could have been the underpinnings of why they said it. But all those type of true monsters, or like real things that got magnified, or maybe it got nuclear waste on it or something, and they got morphed as a result, are just sort of bad things, or things that got put to be bigger or worse because of their circumstance, and they sort of consume and crush and destroy in en masse. And then lastly, we have this kind of dream realm, right? So I'm using Freddy as the example, but I like the whole idea of Freddy Krueger, but I wouldn't heighten him to his own monster worthiness, because I couldn't talk about him without talking about somebody like Jason or Michael Myers in the slasher category. But Freddy's different, and I'll just gonna say, for a face of a genre, I'm gonna say the Dream Invaders. So the Dream Invaders are different, and they're probably, in my opinion, the scariest monster of all, because you have, you're vulnerable, you're asleep, you're not aware of what's going on, your subconscious is at work, it's sort of that CPU in the back of your head that's always on, you're not able to defend yourself, fight, or be aware that something's happening. And then in your dreams, where you're already wondering, is this real? Am I in the dreamscape? Is this happening? And it could be, happy little collies frolicking through a field, and next thing you know, there's some horrible carnage, you're falling off a cliff or whatever. So I'm going to talk in future episodes about dreams and some things that you can expect from them, and maybe how to decipher a few of them. But one piece that always came out with Nightmare on Elm Street and the whole Freddy series that I love that Wes Craven did was that he can get you when you're not looking, when you're not expecting it, and no matter what, you have to sleep. Because if you don't sleep, you're going to get kooky, and you're going to not be okay, because eventually you do start seeing things and hallucinating in reality. So it's like he's got you both ways, because at some point you have to fall asleep. And if you don't, you will end up with more trouble physically and mentally than you should. So when you inevitably have to go to sleep, he's there waiting for you, and then you have to decide, like, can I wake up? Can I not wake up from this? Do I have that sleep paralysis going on? Is this real? Is this not? And that's like a whole new level of scary, because at least if you have a person or a thing standing in front of you, whether you believe it or not, whether people around you see it or not, or believe it or not, it's a thing, it's an entity, it's an apparition, and you could kind of point to it and be like, are you seeing this? And you could kind of go after it. And sometimes it is a situation where you can, shoot it with the bullet or stab it through the heart and stake it or whatever, and, bury it or whatever the situation may be. And that's that. But when you get to dreams, it's hard to fight, because you're kind of fighting yourself. So that was, to me, the scariest and the last one I wanted to save, because you've got these invaders, these like night invaders, and you can sleep anytime. You could be in the middle of class and fall asleep in the daytime, and it could be just as scary if you had something happen than if you went to sleep on purpose at night and had some sort of thought there. So just wanted to talk about some popular monsters and things of the lore, if you will, especially coming around the spooky time, because Halloween's always a fun holiday, and the fall time of year is always neat for different things like this. So I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like what you heard, check us out at eclecticcollectionpodcast.com or listen to us on your preferred platform. I'm Terry Tenaglia. Thanks for listening.